we've got a wonderful conversation coming up today with two of our team based up in the Kimberley. And as many of you will know, the Kimberley is one of Australia's great wild places, a landscape which retains a lot of its biodiversity, where other parts of Northern Australia have lost many of their species. AWC has been working at Mornington Wildlife Sanctuary in the central Kimberley for almost 20 years. And we've got a research station based there, which is home to a fantastic team of ecologists and conservation land managers that are looking after that part of the central Kimberley. It's also a hub for our partnership projects further to the northwest. So to talk about one of the wildlife surveys that's happened over the last couple of months, I'm joined today by two members of the ecology team up in the Kimberley, Larissa Potter, Senior Field Ecologist, and Joe Porter, Field Ecologist based at Mornington. Thanks for joining me, Larissa and Joe.
No worries.
Thanks, mate. Good to have a chat.
We're also joined today by a flock of rowdy corellas in the background. So we've done our best to kind of frighten them away, but if they do interrupt, apologies for that. But it really puts us right there at Mornington. So I might start off with, well, both of you, Joe and Larissa, just telling us a little bit about your background and how you came to work with AWC based up at Mornington in the Kimberley.
Yeah, I've worked in wildlife conservation for about the last 10 years and mainly in ex-situ breed for release programs with a variety of threatened species. And yeah, I've been really interested in AWC's work since I was a kid. Visited the first wildlife sanctuary at Crackamire and kind of been inspired to contribute to that. So yeah, I've been up here for about 2.5 years and absolutely loving it.
Fantastic. And Larissa, you've done other work across Northern Australia in some pretty cool places as well.
Yeah, I did my honours project on Melville Island. It's the largest of the Tiwi Islands. So I moved up to Darwin from Sydney for that. And then I worked for the Antigua Flora and Fauna Division for a little while. And then I came and did an internship here in the Northwest about 3 years ago, and I haven't left.
Fantastic. And both Joe and Larissa are graduates of our internship program, which is a great way for us to, to work with some of the best ecology graduates in Australia. And great to see that both of you have, from that program been recruited to the team up there. Today, I'd really like to talk about this survey that happened up at Artesian Range on Charnley River Wildlife Sanctuary in the northwest part of the Kimberley, so north of where you are at Mornington. And Joe, you were involved in planning the surveys up there a little while ago. What were the main objectives for this round of surveys?
Yeah, me and a colleague, Braden Rolls, sort of spearheaded the project. And yeah, the objectives were to look at the biodiversity in the region. And that was through establishing a variety of survey types to target on threatened species, as well as more broadly the mammals, reptiles, amphibians and birds in the region.
Right, and so this was at the kind of tail end of the wet season, and it was a big wet season. But you told me you actually had kind of 9 separate surveys running concurrently up there. It sounds like a big logistical exercise.
Yeah. Many people are silly enough to do wet season work, but we thought we'd give it a crack, and in February and March we did 2 large trips that were comprised of a number of different survey methods to get a grasp of the different taxa in the region, and for that to inform land management and to get some baseline data and inventory of a fairly unsurveyed area in part of the world.
So Larissa, running that many surveys every single day, what does your schedule look like? Like, what time are you starting? What time are you finishing up? How do you run through all of those things each day?
Well, the first day we travelled up from Mornington to our research base, the Artesian hut, and from there we get all our gear ready for the next about 10 to 12 days. So we'd get choppered out to a site and we'd be there for 3 nights. So once you arrive, you pick a good camp spot from when you fly in, where there's fresh water, somewhere flat, somewhere where you can string up a tarp to protect you from the rain, provide some shade. And then first thing we do is we sort of set up a camp, and then in the afternoon we set some traps, and then after dark we'd have a bit of dinner, and then we do a spotlight survey for at least an hour, and then the next morning we'd be getting up just before sunrise, and we set 2 lines of traps, so we'd check both of those lines, and on the way back down one of them we do a 20-minute bird survey. And then we'd come back and have something to eat, and then we would either do targeted black grassland surveys or some vegetation assessments. And then that was sort of the schedule for the 3 nights of trapping. We do bird surveys each morning, spotlighting at night, and then the main live trapping. And yeah, we did 2 grassland surveys each site. And on the first trip we deployed cameras as well, and then the last trip we retrieved those cameras. And on the first trip put out some audio moths to record some frog calls, and on the last trip we picked them up. And then after 3 days the helicopter comes back, you pack up camp, we fly to the next site, and we do it all again.
That's a lot of work to cram into a short amount of time, but I guess, you know, considering how remote it is, you're really trying to make the most of your time up there on the ground. And it was a big wet season, so can you tell me what the landscape looked like at the time? I've got some photos that you sent me of some of the waterfalls around the Charnley River.
Yeah, the landscape was pretty well saturated by the time we got up there, and the Charnley River rose and fell several meters just in the bursts of rain coming in. So yeah, that kept us on our toes for logistics and getting out all the different traps and getting it all done. But yeah, it's a really rare opportunity to get stuck into some field work at that time of year, and all the animals are a lot more active, so it's a really good time.
Yeah, it's pretty good to be up there in the wet season. Like, it's, you know, very hard to get there at the best of times, and then even in the wet season it's even harder. And then to see the Charnley River flood, and you know, we planned to camp on a beach where we could access 2 rainforest pockets, but we flew there to set up camp. The beach was completely underwater, and we had to reassess where we were going to be and how we we're going to set the traps. And I think very few people ever get to see the Charnley River looking like that. And, you know, there's just waterfalls flowing off into the gorge from everywhere, and it was absolutely amazing. Yep.
It's so lucky to be able to see that landscape at that time, and you know, areas that are really quite inaccessible. I've got a photo of one of your camps here set up. So obviously you're needing to shelter from the elements, but you also want to be close to the site, so you're not having to travel too far. Looks like a fairly rudimentary kind of setup you got there. Was it comfortable?
Yeah, that one actually wasn't too bad. The one before that got very soggy because the flat spot ended up being a bit of a swamp, which we didn't know at the time. But yeah, we just managed to find one flat spot for the tent there, and then one flat spot for all our gear. Especially we use iPads, and we have, you know, good spotlights, and we try to keep all our electronics as dry as possible. So we string up that tarp to protect it from the rain, and also provide some shade when the sun does come out. But yeah.
Now, you mentioned the spotlighting surveys, and I know there's a whole bunch of special reptiles up in Artesian Range. We might finish up with, you know, one of the really special ones that you found, but there's geckos, there's frogs. Can you talk through some of the species that you were excited to see up there? And I'll try and share photos at the same time.
Yeah, that photo that you've got there, fringe-toed gecko, River-Artesian Potter. Yeah, that's one of the double-handers up there. It's a huge gecko. We also got giant cave gecko, and yeah, a number of Kimberley endemics. So that was fantastic to find them on the spot.
And the giant cave gecko is one of the largest species in Australia, isn't it? It's like almost as long as your forearm, and it's got that extra kind of adhesive pad on the tip of the tail. So a really strange species. And then also some great frogs as well.
Yeah, that's Notorum wageli. It's one of the sort of burrowing frogs, and it breeds up on the ephemeral sandstone deposits where you get a shallow water body, and each night you'd hear them calling, and and they're out in good numbers. So it was, yeah, nice thing to go to sleep to.
Yeah, and they're one of those species that are found in the North Kimberley region, so they're an endemic. Yeah, pretty cool to see.
Right. So one of the reasons that the Kimberley is so important, and one of the reasons AWC has dedicated, so much of our resources into that region, is that it's a place where a lot of species that have disappeared elsewhere seem to be clinging on. Do you want to talk about some of the mammals that are still relatively abundant in this part of the Kimberley, which have declined elsewhere?
Yeah, so you're spot on there, Joey. We set a number of different cage types, and the larger cage traps, and as well as the remote cameras to see what animals are in the area. We ended up getting 9 different mammal types, including things like golden and northern bandicoots, golden-backed tree rat. We got northern quolls, pale field rats. So yeah, the number of mammals and the variety was outstanding for the trip. It was really great to see.
Yeah, it was also interesting to see that some species, we trap a site, you wouldn't necessarily get them in the traps, but you'd see them when we're doing the spotlight surveys, like scaly tail possums and in some big fruiting fig trees and golden-backed tree rats in some of the rainforest pockets. Yeah.
So the landscape is quite different to Mornington where you are. So, we think of the Kimberley and we think of those big kind of sweeping gorges and savannas. But Artesian Range is very rocky and complex. And I guess your surveys were designed to sample different aspects of the habitats up there. Larissa, what was it like getting right down into those rainforest gullies or vine thickets? What's it like on the ground down there? And is it worth it kind of scrabbling through all that to set lots of traps?
Well, the interesting thing about those rainforest pockets and monsoon vine thickets, as they're often called in the Kimberley, is that every one of them seems to be a little bit different. So we did 2 sort of rainforest habitats. One was on the base of a scree slope and on the edge of the Charnley River. And that one, moving through it was viney and very steep and rocky. And then we did one that was along a gorge. So the rainforest was the base of the gorge. And that one actually, it was a lot more open underneath, but had a really dense canopy. And it's very hard to carry cage traps through that. And we only caught a few species in there, but I think it's still really interesting to have surveyed that habitat type. Yeah.
Right. And you were talking before about one of the mammals that you caught in cage traps up there. And I might just share this photo and see if people can work out what it is. It's such a bizarre and unique bit of anatomy. What are we looking at here, Joe?
Yeah, that's one of the mammals that we caught. It's a scaly tail possum or wilder. And yeah, as you can see, the tail is perilous and it's almost reptile-like. They use it to grip when they're moving through rocky areas in the canopy when they feed. And yeah, they're certainly quite wriggly in the bag when you catch them. Bit of a handful.
And they're pretty big. They're kind of like what, equivalent to a brush-tailed possum or something like that?
Yeah, they'd be like basketball size and really strong, particularly on the shoulders. They're quite ripped on the torso. And yeah,
they're very
strong.
Fantastic. Well, it must be great to see some of those mammals that you can't see in a lot of other places. Very special species up there. And then during the day, you're doing bird surveys. So you mentioned the black grass wren, a species very close to my heart. How are they going up there? Because I haven't visited for the last few years. Are you still seeing plenty of black grass wrens?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did really, really well with black grass wrens. All the protected sandstone, so all the suitable habitat for them. We got animals, yeah, birds flying around and in good numbers. So yeah, that was really great to see, and this would be a baseline for long-term monitoring of black grass wrens, and yeah, we're helping form land management interventions such as improving our burning regimes and weeding, feral animal control, that kind of thing.
Right, and these surveys are designed to be carried out regularly, which is a whole part of our model. So it's part of this ecohealth framework that AWC has implemented across all of our sanctuaries and partnership sites. And so is the plan to go back and repeat all of those 9 different surveys next year or in a couple of years?
Yeah, hopefully annually or every 2 years we'll go back and revisit the 12 sites, and then we'll be able to compare, contrast the differences between the years and get trend data into the future.
One of the species that's also found up in that part of the Kimberley is the northern quoll. And this is actually, it's kind of it's the largest marsupial carnivore in Northern Australia, at least. So a lovely little animal. But we know that they're under threat from various things. So like other mammals of that size, they can fall prey to feral predators, cats up there. Poor fire regimes are also damaging to their habitat. But there's a specific threat to northern quolls, Larissa. How are they going with cane toads?
Yeah, so over the last few wet seasons, we've had a really big research project going up in the Artesian range. And this was the last year that we sort of were putting out those monitoring cameras. And we tracked the toad over the last few wet seasons, spent a lot of time spotlighting and putting out cameras and finding out where toads were and how close they were. And so we know exactly when they arrived, which was in sort of April last year. So the end of that wet season, they arrived at the hut. And we had lots of pre-toad data on quoll population, like densities and where they're occurring. And then this year we've gone back and put the cameras in the same spots. And throughout the surveys we caught quolls, and we've got them on the cameras still, so that's really good to note. But it'll be interesting to see how the population fares going forward.
Yeah, so something that we're keeping a close eye on, because we know that toads have had an impact on a group of species across the north as they've kind of moved into new areas, and it's really those things that eat them. So large snakes, big goannas, and those native predators, things like the northern quoll, which can be especially affected. So at this point, I guess it's watch and see, monitor what that impact is, and then look for any signs of resilience in those populations, and hope that we can, at least learn something from toads moving into that area. Now, Joe, on one of the last days of the surveys, you made a really wonderful discovery. Can you describe that morning to us and what it was that you came across when you were checking the traps?
Yeah, it was a really good morning. We almost got 100% saturation. Like every animal had every cage had an animal in it, and we'd processed the wilder scaly-tailed possum, which was pretty feisty in the bag, but no worries there. Sort of moved on, and as we're looking into the distance to find one of our other traps, saw some eye shine up on a rock, and looked over at the sky and said, "Oh, that looks like a big snake," or something like that. And as we got a little bit closer, I realised it was a rough-scaled python, which are a really unique and rarely seen snake up in the Kimberley. We approached it and we got a genetic sample, and it was pretty amazing to see it in that landscape and to actually sort of feel rough scales and see it in the flesh.
For people who aren't aware, this is kind of like the holy grail for people who are into snakes and reptiles. I remember, well, at least until 2000, there were only like a dozen records or so up in the northwest. We've recorded them a couple of times on Charnley River now, so once before, but quite a few years ago, probably 6 or 7 years ago now. And as far as I know, this is the second record of the species for Charnley River-Artesian range. Must be pretty cool to come across a species that's that elusive and that infrequently encountered.
Yeah, absolutely. It was and it was a good size one. It was probably 1.6 meters, and yeah, it was really placid and relaxed. So yeah, it was a an absolute surprise, and yeah, another treasure of the Kimberley.
Is this is there any kind of targeted monitoring you can do for a species like that, or is it just too difficult because they're so rarely seen?
Yeah, I think still a lot's not much is known about the species. They've been found in complex sort of vine thickets through to rocky ranges and even some sort of dissected sandstone in savanna. So yeah, if you were to set up a monitoring program, it'd be yeah, you'd have to scratch your head a bit and try to yeah, come up with a good study design. But yeah, the opportunistic surveys are particularly good, spotlighting and ground searches. So yeah, that's something that we'll possibly look at in the future.
These are, you know, these are people that live and work in the Kimberley year round. So I'm sure you'll have lots of good questions for them. And we've had some that have been sent in already. Actually, one of the great questions here is asking about that frog that I showed you before, Notodon, what its call sounds like. Would one of you enlighten us?
Oh, go on, Larissa. They're pretty good calls.
Nah, this one's for you, Joe.
I suppose it's like a whoop, whoop, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, sure. And you're using audio recorders now to detect frogs up there. Is that kind of changing the way that we survey for things like frogs?
Yeah, absolutely. And remote cameras and audio moths are really powerful because you can leave them out in really remote areas for several months, even 6 months at a time. And yeah, trying to get out to these inaccessible areas is often really difficult and costly. So, and in the wet season, yeah, it can be a bit challenging. So, no, it's really good to trial them, and we'll yeah move forward with progressing that.
We've got a couple of questions just about the impact of the big wet season, because as we've mentioned, it was a really big wet driven by a La Niña system. So that meant, I think, rainfall that was close to average or slightly above average. But following a couple of really dry years, have you been able to see either anecdotally or in the trapping data a difference in what you're actually catching in the traps?
Yeah, absolutely. So the landscape looks much greener, and things that had dried up the last few years have got water at the moment still, which is really good. So yeah, both the 2018-19 and 2019-20 wet seasons were below average. Certainly here at Mornington, we don't have rain gauges in most of the remote areas we work in. And then this recent wet season was the third wettest we've had on record. So it's been really good to see the difference. And certainly with the Mornington Marion Downs Tableland survey, fauna survey that's happening at the moment, we've got more captures than we did in 2019. We didn't do the survey last year. So yeah, things at the moment look like they're starting to bounce back, but we haven't looked at the numbers too closely yet. The survey's still happening. But it might take a few years for things to sort of, you know, there's a bit of a lag between the resources and then the population. So we'll see how things go. Yeah.
Yeah, and a question kind of related to that, actually, just about, you know, the results. We're obviously generating a lot of data from these kinds of surveys. You know, it's tens of thousands of trap nights every year across the Kimberley. So there's all of that data being generated, and then there's the analysis that needs to be done. And I guess typically that's over the wet season for you guys. Is it then published in scientific journals? Have you done any of that work that gets this research out there and you know, lets other people learn about what's going on in the Kimberley?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the data that we're collecting is contributing to sort of our knowledge base, and we write reports on each of the trips, survey reports, and then at the end of the year we have ecohealth reports, and some of our projects feed into publications. This trip was really good because we were able to collaborate with a researcher out of Charles Darwin University, who's looking at genetic diversity across small to medium-sized mammals in Northern Australia. So each of the mammals that we captured, we we took a tissue sample, and that's feeding into that project to better understand genetic diversity across the geographic range, as well as how animals use refugia and expand and contract with climatic variation, fire regimes and other things. So yeah, that's a really great project to be part of, and we've certainly provided a lot of samples.
Yeah, cool. I think those collaborations can be really valuable because we've obviously got this big bank of data. Other people might have expertise in analysing particular aspects of it. And we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, actually, with AWC's geneticist, Dr. Jennifer Pearson. So it's good to have that expertise on the national team as well to help with that analysis. A couple of people are just asking about, at the other end, how you actually collect those genetic samples. What's involved taking a genetic sample from a python or a small mammal?
Yeah, the reptiles are pretty straightforward. You generally just take a little clip of the tail, like a tiny little, maybe 2 mil off the tail, or a scale clip off the belly with the snakes. With the mammals, once we process them and weigh them, measure them, and identify them, we just get a tiny bit of their ear, and we've got a little ear punch, and it takes sort of like a half moon sort of shape out of the top of the ear, and then that's stored in ethanol to preserve the tissue.
Yeah.
So it's just like a piercing.
Yeah.
Okay. A few questions here asking about the threats to these different animals that you're working with. So as with all of AWC sites, the science program is there in large part to inform the conservation land management programs. And that's fairly well developed at Mornington because we've been working there for a long time and in the central Kimberley. So what about Adaptation Range? Are the threats different up there because of the landscape?
Yeah, I think, feral herbivores like cattle and donkeys, the Artesian range is far too rugged for them to be in. So we don't see any of those feral herbivores up there. You get them in the valleys just at the start of the Artesian range, but up in the range itself, we don't see them. And there was also a PhD student who did a big study on feral cats that found that their numbers are much lower in that dissected sandstone country because they also find it harder to get around, and their hunting success is much lower in complex habitats. They prefer flat, open habitats, things they've just recently burnt, where they can see their prey easily and catch it more easily as well.
Yeah, really interesting. So the landscape kind of moderates some of those threats, I guess. It sounds like that's the case up there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. We've got lots of people interested in stealing your jobs, I think. So, there's those of us stuck in Southern Australia, especially this week, it can feel like, we're a long way away from the tropical north. So there's some envious questions here, but also, people early in their career in ecology that are interested in doing the kind of fieldwork that you guys do every day. So you came through the internship program at AWC. Do you guys have advice for people who would like to get into this kind of work?
Yeah, I don't think there's any direct path to these kinds of things. Certainly volunteering helped, getting to know people, getting experience with different trapping techniques, and even just experience of being remote is really helpful. And then, applying for internship program, the Northwest internship program I found it absolutely amazing. And since I've done the internship, I've also been involved in the hiring process and, the next round of interns. So it's really good to see that the other side of it. It's really hard to pick people. We get so many applications, but we take volunteers on lots of our surveys. So it's great for people to come and see what we do and get some experience and meet everybody and stuff like that.
another question kind of to do with that is, what's the hardest part of the job? We talk about all the perks and, camping in these amazing places and working with incredible animals. What are the challenges of being so remote up there, Joe?
There's not too many, to be honest, Joey. It's pretty good. Yeah, sometimes being in the office for more than a few days can drive you crazy, but no, really,
you poor thing.
Yeah. No, it's great. Being a field ecologist is a dream job, and it connects you to nature a lot more, and gives you a sense of place. So yeah, I think no complaints on my side.
I think some days, it's very hot, and that second field trip was very wet, so we weren't dry for very much of it.
That was a bit how you going.
Certainly went through a few field shirts. They got ripped in the tough conditions, but I don't know. I think we all love that kind of side of it. Just, climbing over boulders, listening for black grasslands and things like that. It just outweighs all the negatives.
It's looking pretty good from here, I'll tell you. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. I think we might finish up. So there's quite a few more questions, but we won't have time to get to all of them. Larissa and Joe, thank you so much for sharing your experience of the survey at Artesian Range, and for all of the work that you do, living there year round, conducting these really ambitious, really comprehensive science and monitoring programs. We're so lucky to have people like you on the team.
Oh, cheers, Joey. Thanks. And thanks to all the rest of the team that contributes to these surveys up here, and the rest of AWC and conservation.
Thanks, guys, and I'm glad to hear the Corellas have quietened down. That was great to hear from you both. To everyone watching, thank you for tuning in to AWC in Conversation again this week. I'd like to remind you that if you've been inspired by the wonderful work that our teams are doing, not just in the Kimberley, but right across Australia, it's not too late to make a donation before the end of financial year. You can still take advantage of our matching program, and the details of that are on the website. That's at australianwildlife.org. And we're taking a break from AWC in Conversation, so that's the last one for this season, but we'll certainly be back with more webinars before the end of the year. None of this work is possible without your support. So thank you once again, and we'll see you next time.